Hello, everybody. It's Friday, and that means it's Sales Chats time. Welcome. This is Eric, and as always, with me is John Golden.
Yeah, hi everybody. Today I don't get to sit alongside Eric. I'm remote today, but I wouldn't miss our sales chat, and especially at our guest today, if you want to introduce him, Eric.
Absolutely, but the reason John isn't sitting by my side is he's celebrating a very monumental birthday, so happy birthday, John.
Thank you very much.
And of course, the third person on the screen here that you see is Matt Mcdarby, the president and CSO of United Sales Resources, where he serves as the company's president and chief sales officer. He leads the company's research and advisory team, provides coaching and support to all USR staff and customers. And you know what's interesting is Matt and John actually go back a little ways, because prior to founding USR, Matt served as the vice president of enterprise sales for Huthway, a familiar company. One of the world's leading sales training companies and the creators of Spin Selling. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you so much, and happy monumental birthday to John.
Thanks, Matt.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, one of the things that I really want to get to quickly in this chat is Matt just got done with a landmark survey around how customers derive value. So, Matt, why don't you tell us a little bit about the survey particulars, if you will?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, we finished up the survey right at the end of 2014, and it took us the better part of 2 months to really dig into the data and understood what it told us. But very simply, we surveyed, we got responses, I should say, from 799 people, not 800, 799. And we asked really just two simple questions, and we wanted to get at the heart of why do buyers make certain buying decisions. So the first question was, in the last 2 years, have you made a significant purchase of a product or service from someone other than the low-price provider? Right? So it was a yes or no. Very simple. If they said yes, the follow-up question was asked, and it was effectively, why did you do that? Right? So specifically what we asked them was, what was the number one reason that you chose to do business with that supplier? Number one reason. And we figured that if we got that, if we could look at those responses, it would tell us something about, not only why did customers buy something based on criteria other than price, but more importantly, it might tell us a bit about what did they value, like why did they do that. So again, it took the better part of 10 months to gather the data and 2 months to figure out what it all meant. But we're excited to see the results, and I know that you've got some of them there in front of you, so we can talk about that if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was summarized from the study was that the top 3 value drivers for how customers made their decisions. Number one was actually a really obvious one, and that's trust, right? That you've done business with that person or that company before, and we trusted them more than anyone else. And I think that's probably an ingredient that's been true for thousands of years, if you will, in the buyer-seller relationship. So we don't need to go that deep in discussing that. Number 2 was we tested the product or service and we believed that it was the best fit for our needs. So this is kind of interesting, right? Because this is basically passing the sniff test, and ultimately it's where a lot of people stop in their sales thinking around, oh, okay, the product sold itself,
Right.
And I was just kind of along for the ride. But maybe one of the most interesting findings was number 3 was that the buyers understood the outcome or result that they wanted to achieve, or that the salesperson, the sales company, understood the outcomes that they wanted to achieve as a buyer better than anyone else did. And so this driver, plus the next several drivers that we were, in your study, basically shed light on, wow, this is actually something really important and kind of new and worth talking about and spending some time. Matt, give us a little color on that finding.
Sure. Yeah. In fact, when we saw that result, I was kind of surprised. We knew, obviously, it's important for salespeople to understand the outcome that customers want to achieve. It's kind of a no-brainer. What we didn't know was that so many buyers would say that that was the number one reason that they made the choice that they did. And so it comes down to, that's clearly something that a salesperson can choose or choose not to do in the process of helping someone to buy. They can ask, right? What are you trying to achieve? Or what's the business outcome that you want? Describe the result to me. What happens if? And it's remarkable that so many of the responses that we got back from buyers said that was the reason that we chose them. They understood it better than anyone else, and they were able to articulate it back. And I think what it also implies is they were also able to link their capabilities back to what the customer wanted to achieve.
Yeah. So Matt, do you think that perhaps today, with there's been a lot of talk around different sales approaches, social selling, challenger selling, all these different types, which all, as we know, all have application at times. But do you think that some people have moved away from just fundamentally asking good questions at the beginning and really trying to understand, as you say, what outcome is the prospective buyer trying to achieve, and then not just assuming that they understand, but really validating it with them?
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly what this says. Now, and it's not simply because buyers said that they valued sellers who sought to understand their outcome. What they're telling us is they chose salespeople who did that, right? They noticed that they went out of their way to understand the outcome, which means that there were other salespeople that did not, right? That was actually a point of differentiation in the buying process. This guy understood it better than them. I went with him. So it seems like such a fundamental thing, but apparently there are still salespeople out there who aren't asking customers that question, what do you want to achieve? It's baffling, frankly, and any methodology that doesn't encourage that kind of questioning should be set aside. But there are so many other models that do that, to your point, I think they all have application, but it's pretty clear that from these results, buyers value when we understand the business outcome they want, so we better be asking.
Well, let's take it to a practical level, Matt. So one of the ways that you could interpret this is, the buyer basically says they go through, okay, I can potentially trust your company. I want to evaluate. Can you give me a demo of maybe in our case, your software, or show me what your services are all about? And then the buyer or the seller immediately proceeds into just almost robotically that demo, that product, that features and benefits. Kind of almost regurgitation. That's where you're saying the problem lies. Sure.
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of a trap. It was the second driver of value that you called out, right? We tested the product or service, and we believed it was the best fit for our needs. I think there's a lot of risk then. A salesperson could hear that and say, well, then we just have to have a really good trial, right? We just have to have a really good demo version of our product. And that's way too simplistic a way of looking at it. The right way to position a demo, right, is not to simply accept at face value, okay, Mr. Customer, here's your trial, let me know how it goes, and keep your fingers crossed. Instead, it's, okay, we appreciate the fact that you want to have a trial of the product. Let's set that up. But first, let's just talk about what would a successful test be for you? Like, how would you know if you trialed this product that it was a successful test? What are you going to be looking for? It's kind of a different version of the outcome question. It's what's the outcome you're looking for with the test, but very similar, right? It's tell us what would be a successful test for you.
So it's almost like, I mean, that's a little bit overlooked, I would say, by probably a lot of people, because people would do this certainly for when they have sold the product and the rollout, so they would say, okay, for this successful implementation of this project, what does success look like? But the idea of doing that also just even for a trial or a demo is a bit different, right? And that's something I think that a lot of people will overlook, and I think that's a great nugget to take away for anybody listening, is that if you are doing a demo, if somebody is doing a trial, that you should spend the time up front to actually set the success metrics for that trial and the outcomes, and then have something to discuss with them afterwards, rather than just, did you like it?
Yeah. How'd it go?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, precisely. Right.
So this really leads to kind of our Q1 that we've thrown out to the Twitterverse, if you will, which is how has the change in buyer behavior affected business value drivers?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about changing buyer behavior, and we all know it has, right? Anybody who pays any attention, anybody who's selling anything knows that buyers are operating a little bit differently now than they used to. And I'm in part contributing to the noise, I was going to say, contributing to the chorus that says, pay attention to what customers are doing on social, right? But I don't want to overemphasize that. I think some people would be accused of overemphasizing that point. Let's just say, in summary, buyer behavior has changed, period, right? Where they go to get information, who they talk to, how they talk to them, how they network, that's all different. But, you know, the perspective I have on the value drivers and their relationship to buyer behavior is, I think I said this to one of you before, it's kind of meet the new value drivers, same as the old value drivers, right?
Right.
Only they're in different measure, right? They're in different order, maybe. And I thought about it, I was like, why do I, so it's kind of Baba O'Reilly ringing in the back of my head where they say, meet the new value drivers. Then I realized I've got this lithograph over my shoulder it's autographed by John Entwistle sitting in my office. I think that's why the thought came to mind. But the point of that is, you know, there's no great surprises when you look at what it is that drives value for customers. Yeah, they're buying differently, and I don't think it means that they're deriving value in a dramatically different way. It's just that maybe the order of things that drive value for them have shifted a bit, and I think that's what our research reflects.
So talk a little bit about some of that order and how it's changed.
Yeah. Well, look, if you go back a decade or more, we're nodding to Huffweight again, right? Neil Rackham, who founded that company, did a study with a guy named John DeVincentis, who was a McKinsey consultant, I believe, back in at that time.
That's correct.
Right?
Yeah.
And they were really the first ones to ask the very same sorts of questions that I asked, only I did it in 2014. They wrote a book based on the results of that research, and there were essentially 3 key value drivers that they called out. They all boiled down to seller behavior. The seller helped the customer to see an unrecognized problem, or arrived at an unanticipated solution, or the seller acted like a broker of resources. So all of those, if you drill down past, particularly if you go past my top 3, if you look down in our research, you can see all of those drivers are still there. They're just not the first few. Now, what I don't know about the research back then was, where did trust fall in? Did people actually call that out? But it struck me that those other drivers that they identified however many years ago really were pretty far down the list. I think the other thing that's notable is there was a small set of responses, maybe 1.5%, that called out specifically that the seller challenged us. 1.5%, right? A very, very small number of buyers said that was actually the thing that tipped the scales. Instead, it was things like they asked about our business outcome. They helped us see things a little bit of a different way. It wasn't they told us and challenged. It was they really sought to understand. So that's the thing that I think is really intriguing when you get down into the details of the research.
Almost makes me think of like a Jerry Maguire moment of, they got me. You had me at hello.
Right.
It's truly understanding, and not just understanding logically and that kind of left brain, but also that emotional side, and that goes to the heart of trust, right? Like where my problems are now your problems, or vice versa. Your problems are now my problems, and so I have this understanding. So what I want to understand, though, further, because I think the research is going to shed some really good light on this, is how do we get ourselves as sellers into the position to enable us to understand better those customer outcomes? What questions should we be asking? What guidance do we need to provide? What context, and how should we shape those conversations? What should we be doing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for the purposes of this discussion, and this is just the way I think anyway, let's keep it simple, right? Because every discussion with a client is going to be different. There is no recipe that you can apply to every call necessarily. But I think it starts with, and this is the thing that people can practice, before you have, and it's probably, in my case, it's a question I ask in the first call, which is, can you tell me about the business outcome you're trying to achieve, right? It ain't rocket science. It's, and we can put a label on that. What kind of question is it? It's a question that reflects some concern and some interest, right? But I think that's something that a lot of salespeople should probably spend time practicing. Now, as we all know, we're salespeople in our own ways, and as a coach, which is another part of what I do, I'm frequently I often have to ask the same question several different ways until we really get the answer that we want. And so I think it's important to have a variety of different ways to ask that what is the business outcome you want question, right? Can you tell me more? Oh, interesting. Okay, that wasn't the answer. What are you trying to achieve in measurable terms? What would success look like? Right? There's a lot of different ways to do it. Everybody should have their 2 or 3 ways that they ask that business outcome question that they're comfortable with, because they're probably going to have to ask it multiple times and of multiple people during the course of that decision-making process.
And I think you really hit on something there that we should focus in on again, and just for everybody, and that's the idea of simplicity and not overcomplicating things. Mm-hmm. And that is, at the end of the day, if somebody is looking for a solution, they have a problem that they're trying to solve, they have a business outcome, they have a need, they have an opportunity they want to take advantage of. And the more you can have a simple, straightforward conversation early in the process about what that is and what that means to you, then you obviously have that opportunity, as you talked about with the value drivers, to help them maybe uncover an even better solution, or even recognize that there may be problems inherent in what they're trying to do that maybe they haven't realized. So that dialogue is so rich, but it's very simple and straightforward to have that early on.
Yeah, thank goodness. Right? This is complicated enough. Let's not make the task of selling any more difficult than it already is. There's just one quick related thought. Sometimes we'll get customers who come to us and seem like they're pretty clear on what they need. We need X. It needs to look like this. It needs to do that. And it needs to have, meet these other criteria. Sometimes that'll even come to us in the form of a formal procurement. There's still opportunity to ask about their desired outcome, right? But we have to pivot off of their clear description of what they need and just ask them an even simpler question, which is why, right? So you seem to be very clear about what you want. Why? Tell us. We'd love to hear. And if you're not clear about that, then is there value in our maybe having a deeper discussion about that? We hope so.
So this really kind of has bled into our second question, I think, Eric, around the how critical salesperson behavior is when creating value during the buying process. So we've often said for years now that as good as a product or service is, it's largely perceived as commoditized in the eyes of most buyers. They don't really see a massive difference. So the difference has to often be created by the salesperson's behavior during the sales process, right? Right.
Now the thing that, for sure. So we've talked specifically about one particular kind of question that's really useful. I think another, and this I wouldn't necessarily describe this as a behavior. It's kind of a set of behaviors or a strategy. Which is, to back up, I think today it is a little bit harder to tell where a buyer is in their decision-making process than maybe it was a few years ago. Not massively more difficult, but a little bit harder, simply because they do go through so much of their decision-making process on their own, because they are empowered. They don't need us to give information about who we are and what we do. They can get that. That's been the case for a while, but with the prevalence of social media and networking with people all over the world quickly, I just think that buyers are not showing their hand as often, perhaps, as they might have even just a few years ago. So I think a really critical way in which salespeople can start the process of creating value is just by looking for cues about where a customer is in their process. Right? Try to look for some, and the only cues that I know, and there's where I come from, and what my training is, and the models that it's to try to understand what actions have the customer taken. Right? Is there any way for us to tell, like, what was the last action that they took to address this problem or that opportunity in their business? And can we find out? And then, if we know that, what do we think is the next very specific and measurable thing that they should realistically take if they're taking this problem or opportunity seriously? If we can figure that out, if we become really good at that, then it becomes possible for us to not only identify where they are in their decision-making process, but actually, to the best of our ability, align with them, and then possibly influence their thinking, right? And that's where questions like, Can you just tell me a little bit more? The why questions. That's interesting. You said you're trying to achieve this outcome. Let's talk that through. That's when those opportunities become a little bit more obvious to us, when we at least have a general sense of where the customer is in their process. So I think that's really a key way in which sellers can start the value creation process.
Yeah, it's really interesting you bring that up, because I feel, and I totally agree with you, that there's just, I often summarize it this way: there's more publicly available information to aid in whatever you're trying to make a purchase decision on than ever before. You see these stats that say something like the amount of information created on the internet in the last 2 years is the equivalent of all the information created in the history of time prior to, right? Yeah. So some of that's got to be related to products and services that I'm going to buy. And that trend doesn't go anywhere but, kind of straight up the hockey stick. So if you think about kind of that publicly available, my research is kind of almost as good as your research, but then you get into a really interesting sales dynamic where it's like, well, what are you paying attention to? What kind of insights? And your questions, I think, go a long way towards teasing that out. What have you already looked at? Where are you in that buying process and your thought process? Have you looked at this, right? And one of the things that I think is worth kind of talking about here too is, doesn't that change the dynamic, right? The information asymmetry that we used to have as salespeople being gone largely suggests that we talk to customers now. Does it not?
Well, yeah, I mean, you broke up just a little bit toward the end, but I think I follow where you're going. Yeah, well, I guess I would say it this way. Just because there's a lot more information available to customers, it does not mean that salespeople are somehow less valuable in the process, right? I think there's, and again, I know that people write things like that and put that out into the marketplace because they have, in some cases, they have a specific methodology, right? They're driving people to a certain place, right? No, you must do it this way, because if you don't, you will be marginalized. Well, yeah, okay, sure, but I think given what you said and what we found in our research, it's very clear that there's an opportunity for salespeople to continue to help customers clarify some really important things. They're not the sorts, and this act of clarifying is a higher art form in sales, right? It's not something that can necessarily be automated. It requires somebody who's curious, who's legitimately concerned about the customer's outcome, right? Who can help to build some of that trust, right? That's one of those really important drivers. But the way you do that is you look somebody in the eye, you have a conversation, you ask thoughtful questions, and you really care about the answers, and you keep asking, right? So, I mean, the thing that I take away from the whole everything I hear, I should say, about the great deal of data available to customers and all the information that's available just tells me it's that much harder at times for customers to make buying decisions. There's too much there. If they don't have a partner who's there helping them think it all through and make sense of it and figure out how to get the outcome that they want, then they're potentially lost. They can make really bad decisions. Thank goodness for that. As a salesperson, that means I've got a role for a really long time. So that's what it tells me.
Right. Well, and this almost blends in, if you will, for the Twitter sphere, and that is, what can lead Did you get that, Matt?
No, I'm going to need you to repeat that, Eric, because you did break up a little bit.
Sure. So what can a sales leader do to operationalize that value creation piece?
Sure.
On behalf of their entire sales team?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think it starts with a simple step, which is, take advantage of research like this or other, that comes from others, and know what the drivers of value are, right? And I think what we've shown with this latest bit of research is they're not static. They do change. Not necessarily what drives value, but the priority that customers place on certain things that drive value as they buy. So pay attention to that, right? And as a sales leader, if you can't explain crisply to your team what it is that's really going to make a difference for buyers, then you're probably missing an opportunity. So that's point one. Just helping people to understand how those drivers of value relate to their customers and how they make decisions. And then from there, and these are, I'm going to describe some big important steps in very simple language. You've got to build the sort of culture in which an appropriate amount of time and focus and discussion and effort and planning and methods are spent on the task of value creation. Because if nothing else, what our research tells very clearly is that, it was 57%, by the way, of the people who responded to the survey said yes to question 1. We did buy based on something other than price, right? Even if that number seems low to you, right? There's still a large majority of folks who are saying, no, there are legitimately things that a sales force can do that will differentiate them from other suppliers. So from the sales leader's perspective, I'll keep it simple, right? Help your people understand what the value drivers are. Look at the methods that you're using as an organization, if you have any, right? Look at the organizations that you have and figure out, do they support the kinds of questioning that we're talking about here? Do they support our people and encourage them to ask things like, what's the business outcome you want to achieve? And as you coach, right, if you have a rhythm where coaching is taking place and opportunity and meeting planning and call planning are going on, be sure to ask those questions. Hey, Mr. Salesperson, says here you've got this really big opportunity. Can you tell me a little bit about what business outcome the customer wants to achieve? No? Oh, okay. Would it be useful for us to go find out? And I'm saying it as sort of silly. Yeah. But I think as a sales leader, if you're not asking your people those questions, there's a huge risk that they are not asking their customers those questions.
Yeah, and it goes back to one of the things I know, Matt, that you and I have discussed many times over the years, and we don't have time for a huge discussion on it today, but it goes back to the focus of the sales leader and about whether they are focused early in the pipeline, where they can have those kind of conversations. Have you really established what the business drivers are here for this prospective buyer? If you're focused later in the pipeline and you're coming in at the end, you're too late at that stage. So a lot of it has to do with the focus of the sales leader.
Absolutely. Yep, it starts there. And if that focus isn't there and that leadership isn't there, sales forces can tend to go astray.
Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult to get alignment with the buyer early on, is what we talked about earlier. If your sales leader isn't telling you that that's an important thing to do, let's establish where the buyer is in their process right now before we go any further. And if that takes an extra amount of time, well, so be it. Because if you're trying to sell to a buyer that you think is at one stage of their process and they're actually at another, and you've got that misalignment, well, that's going to show up pretty quickly, right?
Trouble. Yeah, that's not good. You're right.
Shifting more to the personal, and we're God, where did this half hour go? Right, Bam. One of the things that we love to do here at Sales Chats is end with our supercharged sales tip of the day. And so, turning to the personal, name maybe one of your daily secrets to getting in the right mindset for success, Matt.
Sure. I cheat my calendar. What I mean by that is, planning, as you might expect, in what I do is really vital, right? If I'm going to have value-creating conversations with my customers, I tend not to do that by shooting from the hip. Yes, I've got certain questions that are always in the back pocket, like, what are you trying to achieve, right? But in order to have a really deep and specific conversation with a customer, that has to be planned out, and it takes time. Like you guys, my schedule's packed most days. So what I do is, every day, if you look at my calendar, I've got meeting and call planning time designated just like a customer meeting. So that, and I do it usually at least a day in advance, hopefully, sometimes more, depending on how important the meeting is. But I never let myself come into a day without having all the planning that's required to execute the calls that I know I'm going to have later in the day. So I kind of grab myself some time back, and I cheat my calendar in that way. So that's my tip. Put planning time on the calendar, make sure it gets done, and make sure it gets done in advance. And it gives you a lot of confidence as you approach your day, because I don't have any calls where I'm not prepared.
Yeah. And I have to say, I've seen that in action. We've been on sales calls in the past where We have spent maybe 3 or 4 hours the night before in a hotel,
Sure.
making sure that everything is planned out. But I think you're right. I think that's a super takeaway. I think there's a lot of salespeople who will put the meeting on their calendar, but not the planning time. So
Right.
their great tip for today is like put that planning time on your calendar and see how it affects the results of your sales calls.
Yep. Great.
Absolutely. Well, once again, this has been a fantastic sales chats. Matt, thank you for your time and more importantly for your wisdom. I know this is going to be beneficial for everyone that listens. So to everyone out there, thank you so much, and we'll catch you again next Friday.
Yeah, see you next Friday, and thanks again, Matt.
Bye-bye.